Hi there. Welcome to this short podcast. It's looking at the 3.3, 3.4 section of your USA 1954-75, and it's looking at Nixon expanding the war into Cambodia and Laos. So let's start off with regards to that and look at why might the North Vietnamese want to use these two countries. The first reason, in fact, the main reason is it's the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And for you to understand this, I'm going to quickly draw this in. The most obvious route would have been to send supplies from North Vietnam into South Vietnam. But obviously, with American air power, American bases, that was very, very difficult. So what happened was they started to utilize a Ho Chi Minh Trail along through Cambodia and Laos to be able to send supplies in to avoid that area there. And this would bypass American air power, and because they feared the Americans' ability to bomb the Ho Chi Minh Trail. So that was really why the North Vietnamese were using Cambodia and Laos. Now, Nixon had been secretly bombing the Ho Chi Minh Trail in Cambodia since 1969. The leader of Cambodia was neutral. The country, if we look back on the previous map, it was neutral, it took no side, which meant the North Vietnamese sending supplies down there. The Cambodian leader kind of allowed it because he didn't want to get involved, but he also let the Americans and the South Vietnamese armed forces also attack it. Now, in 1970, a new Cambodian leader was in post, and he asked the North Vietnamese to leave. The North Vietnamese joined forces with communist fighters already in Cambodia called the Khmer Rouge and began to attack the Cambodian government. Nixon, listening to his military, then sent American troops into Cambodia with armed forces, and he said, look, it's going to be for a short period of time, because he knew it would be unpopular for him to be saying, I'm trying to get out of Vietnam, but I'm now invading another country. Eventually, he went on TV to explain why he was doing this. Okay? And he was basically saying that this needed to happen for South Vietnam to have a chance to defend itself against the North. Otherwise, it was, making South Vietnam fight with one hand tied behind the back. So if we have a look at these statements, significant damage was done to the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Hundreds of acres of jungle was destroyed, as you saw in the previous picture. Success or failure? Well, that would be a success. Weapons and supplies were captured. Yep. 11,000 communists were killed. Cambodian government remained in control. Yep. Communist bases destroyed. So it's looking really successful. Now this one's interesting. The communists pulled back to safe places deep inside Cambodia, so it is a success. The ARVN were not limited to a 19-mile border line inside Cambodia, but it's telling you there they wouldn't go too far without American support. So it is also showing you that the ARVN can't fight on their own, and it's making that Vietnamization idea very, very challenging. The damage to the Ho Chi Minh Trail didn't stop them. They used trails in Laos, so that's a failure. Huge public outcry, that's going to be a failure. And Congress was furious about it because they'd not been told, and they reduced funding. Now, obviously, if you have a look at this, you'd think it was more success than failure, but for Nixon, these two here were really important for him. Okay? Now, if we have a look at Laos, much like Cambodia, it suffered from communist guerrilla fighters, backed by the North Vietnamese and by the Soviet Union. Remember, it's still part of the Cold War. So the USA had been advising the government of Laos, but as Ho Chi Minh Trail moved into Laos, things need to shift. So after some discussion, they agreed to send troops in with the South Vietnamese to get rid of the communist North Vietnamese fighters there. Now, the difference was that the North Vietnamese got the news that there would be an attack and decided to stay and fight because they couldn't afford to lose the routes. So that there is really, really important. and they got an army of 36,000 soldiers. Now, the ARVN were defeated despite the fact they had lots of American air support. And what was really critical was the ARVN left so much equipment behind, guns, artillery, you name it, they left it behind. It made Americans question the policy of Vietnamization. Could they trust the South Vietnamese to stay and fight if they were losing battles like this? Especially since they had American air power, how would they be when the Americans left? And that really answers that question there. It's this idea that the ARVN are not capable of fighting on their own. Now, because of this, the USA continued to withdraw US forces. They continue with peace talks in public and in secret, like we talked previously. Because of their success in Laos, the North Vietnamese launched an assault in 3 areas, and you can see them kind of here, right? And although initially successful, it was beaten back by the ARVN and American air power. But there was a massive problem. It showed that the North Vietnamese were not going to back down, and certainly that the ARVN was still reliant on American air power to get through this and American support. So because of the Easter offensive, the USA launched a massive air campaign, much bigger than Rolling Thunder. It was called Operation Linebacker. And unlike Rolling Thunder, now the capital of North Vietnam, the city of Hanoi and the port of Haiphong, would be targeted. And this was very, very different. It nearly wiped out the North Vietnamese war industry. It was a lot more severe than previous air campaigns against North Vietnam. They severely disrupted supplies coming from the Soviet Union and China. Lots of radio stations and other communications networks were destroyed. And it actually led to the Soviet Union and China, sorry, it's a mistake there, but I apologize, urging North Vietnamese to actually reach a peace settlement. And this shows you what Nixon was about. Nixon was about kind of dangling the concept of peace talks there, but also he was willing to engage in an expansion of a bombing campaign to make sure that the North Vietnamese would go to the table and discuss it. So what were the pros and cons of launching bombing raids? Well, clearly one pro is going to be getting the North Vietnamese to the peace table, like it said there. But the con is about it's going to be about American reaction to this. If you're aiming to get out of Vietnam, how are you launching more bombing campaigns? And certainly the civil anti-war protests in America, in campuses, would be looking at things like American air power bombing a relatively poor country and using more bombs that were dropped on Japan and Germany in World War II, and thinking, is this fair and right? American air power is literally destroying an entire country. So the pros of it are, yes, it's bringing the North Vietnamese to the peace table. The cons are, quite frankly, it's going to be the American media reaction, the reaction at home. If you're trying to get out of a war, why are you doing this? And it's going to be that kind of those kind of answers there to help explain why the campaign had positives and negatives to it. Well, the next side of your booklet is really, really simple. It's a little comprehension exercise going through the text and answering the questions. So this should be about it. Hope it's been useful. Thank you for listening.